The first time I noticed the red flag, it fluttered so innocently between us that I mistook it for a banner of love. It waved in gentle motions, a silken ribbon of warning that I, in my desperate need to be loved, interpreted as passion. But that's the trouble with crimson warnings. They look too much like romance at first glance. Emma Collins met Daniel Reed at a gallery opening in autumn. The air carried that distinct scent of possibility that only seems to materialize when summer reluctantly releases its grip on the world. She stood before an abstract piece, her reflection distorted in the glass covering the canvas, when his voice found her like an old friend returning. "It's about isolation, I think," he said, his words casual yet precisely measured. "The way we can be surrounded by color, but still feel disconnected from it all." Emma turned to find a man whose presence commanded attention without seeming to try. Daniel's eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who rarely questioned his own interpretation of the world. Later, she would recognize this as the first warning. He spoke of isolation while standing beside her, as if immune to the very connection he was forming. "I was thinking it looked more like liberation," she replied, surprising herself with her willingness to challenge him. All those fragments breaking free from structure. His smile then, slow, appreciative, calculating, would replay in her mind during sleepless nights months later. "I like that better," he conceded, though something in his tone suggested he was merely allowing her this small victory. What followed was the intoxicating waltz of early romance, text messages that stretched until dawn, shared secrets that seemed to bind them in conspiracy against the mundane world, passionate encounters that left Emma feeling simultaneously found and lost. Daniel's charm operated like gravity, a natural force that seemed inevitable rather than constructed. "You're different," he told her on their third date, reaching across the table to brush his thumb across her knuckles. "Most people are so predictable, but you surprise me." The second red flag unfurled here, the subtle devaluation of everyone else to elevate her status in his eyes. But Emma, starved for exceptional connection after years of mediocre relationships, metabolized this as nourishment rather than poison. By winter, they were inseparable, their separate lives merging into a shared narrative that Daniel seemed particularly skilled at authoring. He suggested they move in together after just 3 months, not with desperate pleading but with logical reasoning that made resistance seem irrational. "Why waste money on 2 apartments when we spend every night together anyway?" he asked, his tone practical rather than romantic. "Besides, I hate sleeping alone now." Emma's best friend, Sarah, raised concerns over wine one evening. "It just seems fast," she said carefully, studying Emma's face for signs of receptiveness. "You barely knew each other at Halloween, and now you're planning to live together?" "When you know, you know," Emma replied defensively, reciting the line that had become her mantra. "Besides, he makes me feel seen in a way nobody else ever has." Sarah's response hung between them. "Being seen isn't the same as being known, Em." The statement irritated Emma at the time, but later, in the quiet spaces between Daniel's certainties, she would examine its truth with increasing clarity. Spring arrived, and with it, subtle shifts in their dynamic. Daniel's compliments gradually transformed, acquiring razor edges that cut even as they caressed. "You're gorgeous when you make an effort," he would say, or, "Your laugh is cute when it's not too loud." Each observation delivered as a gift wrapped in conditional paper. Emma began to notice how conversations about her accomplishments at work would somehow redirect to Daniel's experiences, how disagreements always concluded with her apologizing. The pathway between her thoughts and her voice grew cluttered with calculations. How would he receive this? Would this trigger his withdrawal? His disappointment? The most insidious red flag waved in the pattern of their arguments. They never fought dramatically, no shouting matches or broken dishes. Instead, Daniel wielded silence and subtle dismissal, emotional weapons that left no visible wounds but caused profound damage. "I just need space when you get like this," he would say, retreating into impenetrable coldness whenever she expressed discontent or asked for emotional reassurance. Hours or sometimes days would pass before he would return, emotionally speaking, to their relationship. And each time, Emma felt herself growing smaller in his absence, more desperate for his return. She began to preemptively manage his emotions, calibrating her own needs and expressions to maintain equilibrium. The brilliant, challenging woman who had confidently offered alternative interpretations of artwork became a careful archaeologist of his moods, excavating for safe pathways of connection. Summer arrived with suffocating heat and increasing isolation. Emma noticed that their social circle had gradually contracted to include primarily Daniel's friends. Invitations from her own friends came less frequently, and when they did, Daniel often had reasons why they shouldn't attend. Sarah's husband always talks over everyone, he would observe. Besides, I thought we could have a quiet night in, just us. The just us became both sanctuary and prison. Emma's world shrank to the dimensions of their relationship, while Daniel maintained separate territories she couldn't access, conversations she wasn't privy to, experiences he shared vaguely if at all. One evening, while Daniel was working late, Emma received a text from Sarah. Haven't seen you in ages. Miss you. Everything okay? The message unlocked something in Emma, a recognition that rippled through her consciousness. When had she last spent time with friends without calculating the relationship cost? When had she last made a decision without anticipating Daniel's reaction? She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for the woman who had once seen liberation in abstract chaos. The woman looking back seemed familiar but faded, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. That night, Daniel returned home with takeout and easy charm, but Emma viewed him through new awareness. She noticed how he answered a question about his day with a question about hers, then subtly critiqued her response. How his compliments contained hidden barbs. How his touch felt possessive rather than passionate. I was thinking about taking that photography workshop Sarah mentioned, Emma said carefully over dinner, watching his reaction. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. That seems expensive for a hobby you might not stick with. I've been interested in photography for years, she countered, feeling a flicker of her former self. Have you? You've never mentioned it. His tone implied fabrication rather than discovery. Besides, wouldn't you rather we save for that trip to Napa we've been discussing? The red flag now hung between them, impossible to ignore. Not in his words specifically, but in their cumulative effect, the subtle redirection, the unspoken imperative that her desires should align with his vision, the implied questioning of her own memories and interests. Weeks passed with Emma in a state of uncomfortable awakening. She began noticing patterns in their relationship that had been invisible to her before. How Daniel would tell stories that cast her in slightly unflattering lights to their friends, how he would check her phone while she showered, how he would question her recollection of conversations until she doubted her own memory. The term, gaslighting, entered her consciousness during a lunch break at work when she overheard colleagues discussing a psychological thriller. The concept illuminated aspects of her relationship with terrifying clarity. She began researching, recognizing her experiences in clinical descriptions of emotional manipulation and control. Autumn returned, completing the cycle of their relationship. Emma stood in the same gallery where they had met, this time alone, staring at a new exhibition. The piece before her depicted fractured light through prismatic glass. Beauty emerges from brokenness, transformation through disruption. Her phone vibrated with a text from Daniel. Where are you? Thought we were having dinner at home tonight. Emma hadn't mentioned going to the gallery. The knowledge that he was tracking her location, something she had previously rationalized as caring, now felt like another chain in an elaborate cage. Their confrontation that evening wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no accusations. Just Emma finally seeing clearly what had been happening gradually over the course of a year. I need to leave, she said simply, after Daniel finished explaining why her perception of their relationship problems was exaggerated. You're being ridiculous, he replied, his voice simultaneously dismissive and incredulous. We have issues like any couple, but you're blowing everything out of proportion. Maybe, Emma conceded, but not in surrender. But I need space to figure out what's real and what isn't. I don't trust my perceptions anymore, and that terrifies me. So, this is about trust? I've never given you reason not to trust me. His wounded tone would have once sent her into apologetic backpedaling. "It's not about trusting you, Daniel. It's about trusting myself again." The look that crossed his face then revealed everything. Shock that his carefully constructed system of influence was failing, calculation as he searched for a new angle of control, and beneath it all, a cold recognition that she was seeing him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time. In the weeks that followed their separation, Emma experienced disorienting waves of doubt and clarity. She reconnected with friends, resumed abandoned interests, and began therapy to understand how she had become so entangled in Daniel's reality that she lost sight of her own. Sarah sat with her one evening as Emma sorted through possessions from the apartment they had shared. "How did I not see it?" Emma asked, holding a framed photo of herself and Daniel, noticing how her smile seemed tight, her posture slightly leaning away from him. "Because it happens incrementally," Sarah replied. "The water heats 1 degree at a time, and suddenly you're boiling without realizing how you got there." Emma nodded, understanding now how red flags can become normalized when introduced gradually enough. How dangerous patterns can be disguised as passion, concern, or even love. How isolation happens not all at once, but in small surrenders of independence. The final piece of her healing came months later, when Emma encountered Daniel at a mutual friends gathering. He approached with practiced charm and suggested they get coffee to talk. Looking at him now, Emma could see all the red flags waving brazenly where once she had seen only crimson possibilities. The same magnetic pull remained, but now she recognized it as gravitational force rather than cosmic connection, a natural phenomenon to be respected, but not surrendered to. "I don't think that would be helpful for either of us," she replied with gentle firmness, surprising herself with how little his disappointed expression affected her. As she walked home that night under autumn leaves that matched the color of those first warnings, Emma reflected on the subtle difference between passion and possession, between love and control. She thought about how easily we can mistake intensity for intimacy, jealousy for devotion, isolation for specialness. The red flags had always been there, signaling in their silent crimson language. The true growth wasn't in learning to spot them earlier, though that mattered, but in learning to trust her own perception of them, her own internal warning system that had been whispering all along beneath the louder narratives of romance and destiny. Who was right or wrong seemed less important now than understanding how easily we can lose ourselves in the currents of another's reality. How the most dangerous relationships aren't always those that hurt us obviously, but those that erode our sense of self so gradually that we become strangers to ourselves. Emma reached her apartment, her own space now, filled with her choices and reflections, and wondered not about Daniel's perception of their story, but about how many others were currently standing where she once had, mistaking control for care, isolation for intimacy, gaslighting for misunderstanding. How many others were looking at crimson flags and calling them love.